So I'm Rob Rothschild. I'm the Marketing Director at the Center for the Applications of Psychological Type, and we are the publishers of the Murphy-Meiskeier Type Indicator for Children. And we are so thrilled once again to have with us the author of the instrument, Dr. Elizabeth Murphy, and she's going to present this webinar today, the Ask the MMTIC Expert webinar. I think this is the 10th one in our series. And take it away, Elizabeth.
Thanks. Thanks, everyone, for taking time out of your day to share a few moments with us. These series were started so that if you were working directly with families and children, you would have an opportunity to ask questions that had come up in your practice. So even though we have a content focus, and I want to cover that content focus, I want you to feel comfortable asking anything at all in terms of using type with children or with families, so that don't feel restricted to just the focus that we've chosen for today. The idea of coaching parents to guide rather than direct is because the more I watch parents with the very young children, and by young I mean through elementary school at least, I hear a lot of directing where the parent is when it's an emergency and when you need to do it fast. But it doesn't do anything to help the child develop. So the idea that if we're going to work with type and with the type of the parent and the type of the child, the more we can get the parent to be able to use that information to allow independent processing by the child and independent decision making by the child, the more we're going to help each of the children develop. And ultimately, we want adults who can independently process and decide. So it serves everyone in the long run, but in the developmental years, it can take more time. So the objectives that we're going to address for today would include the following. So next slide, Rob. Or do I have them? Yeah. So we're going to look at the basic elements of an MTIC feedback session. We'll look at ways to coach the parents to work with their child's type. And when you're working with type, it's a whole different story when everybody's calm versus when everybody's upset. So we can consider that. We'll talk about this guiding as a strategy, an approach that parents can use. They're probably never going to use it all the time, but the more often they use it, the more it's going to help development. And then we'll remind everyone of that need for affirmation, that all people need affirmation. And when it's possible to give feedback to a child in the language they will hear best, it's like a double whammy. It feels so much more powerful for the kids. Okay, so in a typical feedback session, you start by having done all of your pre-work, but in the actual session, you begin by greeting the child and the parent, and then you explore type only with the child. Parents are there, but it's in an observational role. So although they don't have to be present in the room, if they want to be, the rule we typically will encourage you to use is you may only participate at my invitation as a facilitator of the session. So I might say to the parent during the session, would you like to add some insight here, or would you like to comment here? And then, so then they'd be able to comment. But then they would go back to the observational role until they would once again be requested. Because we don't want the child to feel that they have to respond the way the parent would like them to respond. We want them to have the freedom to be who they are. So that's why we ask the parents to only be in the observational role unless directly invited by the participant, by the facilitator. Okay, so then after that, you explore all of the preferences with the child, and as much as possible to have some child stories, child examples to match the age of the child. So they could be home examples or they could be play and schoolwork examples, but it would still be nice to have the stories that go with them. if you're using the books the way we encourage you to, you can follow along through that book, and all of the text that you need to say with the child is included in the book, so you don't have to remember everything. But your story collection is going to be your private collection. After the child has self-selected, using I am a good student and then also using the characteristics, then you're going to share how they scored. And then after you share how they scored, you compare and say, well, let's see what you said with the I am a good student, let's see what you said with the descriptions, and let's see what you said with your MTIC report. And now you get to decide of all of the pieces that are there, which one do you think is accurate. It gets easy when extroverted shows up in all three settings, but if not, if it shows up in two and not in one, you still want to let the child have that option of deciding. And then we always want the child to know at least one or two ways this information is going to be helpful to them. I mean, the kids know how to use it once they begin to understand it. So they will know, oh, I have to do it this way because this way makes sense for me. But we want to help them if they are kind of stuck on how it might help them when they have to write essays, or how it might help them when they have to study for tests, or how it might help them when they're angry with a friend, or how it might help them when they can't figure out what to do to make their computer work. Just some simple way. Now, in any 1-hour feedback session, we usually encourage at least 15 minutes to be directly with the parent. And when it's directly with the parent, if the child wants to stay, they may. But if they would like to leave, they may also leave, and the conversation be only with the parent. 15 minutes isn't a whole lot of time. But remember, the parent has already sat through and heard all of the descriptive differences. They've already heard what their child has self-selected and verified as their preferences. So your work with the parent at this time can easily be focused on how to help the parent use this information to improve working together in the home, or to help their child improve in their skills with studying, conflict resolution, etc. Okay. So we're going to focus today's content more on how do you help that parent go from the directing method to more of a coaching method. And it also means that you're going to need some blending to know what is the parent's type and the child's type. So we'll just throw out a couple of examples, and again, feel free to ask your questions as we go along, or, at the end. But when we start with just extroversion, and if we have an extroverted parent, they can get so energized by all of the time that is available to do activities. And so being home at night may be a bit boring, so they may be encouraging their kids to join this and join that and join this and join that. And if they have an extroverted child, that may be a great combination. But if they have an introverted child, that may be a struggle. And the introverted child will not know how to say that I don't want to do that, it's too tiring. Now, there could be a lot of reasons why children choose to do or not do something. It isn't always just type-related. But when it is type-related, it many times is that energy. At the end of the day, many of our introverted kids just do not have enough energy to go do 5 new activities that night. They might not mind a 1-night-a-week or a 2-night-a-week commitment. But if you're in soccer and in choir and et cetera, you could be gone every single night and get home just in time to get your homework done, eat dinner, and go to bed, which doesn't allow enough of self-directed time. Then the children's day is controlled by the clock and by events, and they don't know what to do with 5 free minutes or 10 free minutes because they're really not getting that as part of their experience. When you would have that sensing difference versus the intuitive difference, the parent with a sensing preference might really be looking for very clear directions. And so when the child doesn't know what to do for an assignment, you may hear the parent saying, but what did the teacher say? What were the directions? Were you listening? Did you listen when the directions came? If they had an intuitive teacher, the directions might have been so vague, such as go home, envision what you would like to do, and then whatever you develop will be wonderful. Well, an intuitive child might love that kind of a situation, but many sensing children would be very frustrated by that kind of a situation because they don't know what it means when you say go home and envision. Their vision comes from the specificity of information, not from the vagueness. A sensing parent working with an intuitive child will sometimes get very frustrated because the child is looking for that specificity, and the parent would be almost like, well, it's all right, we don't need to know every detail. Let's just do some of this. But for the child, it's like it doesn't have reality. If you can skip over steps, these are sequential kids, and the totality of thought is built on each one of those steps being able to be executed. So if you're an intuitive parent, you might struggle while your child gets started on the task. But if they are a sensing child, once they get a grasp of what they want to do and they pulled it all together, they can take off and get the job done. So they need the support during the design phase. The intuitive child does not need support during the design phase, but may absolutely need support during the implementation phase. Because during that part, all of a sudden it'd be like, well, I don't know, what am I supposed to do there? Where do we keep the tape? Do we have any red paper? How am I supposed to get this done? And then they become whiny just because it's so annoying to have to go get all the specific pieces and pull them together to produce it. They would love to have an administrative assistant with them from the beginning who would just provide them with all the resources they need and then give them the freedom to assemble them in innovative ways. But gathering all the resources can be a stretch. So then what one parent might appreciate about one of their children, they might find as a struggle and a stretch with another child in the family. When we get to the thinking and feeling kind of pairing, with that thinking and feeling kind of pairing, we often see it during the conflict resolution and how we resolve things. Parents with that thinking preference can be very effective at getting their children to name the problem, solve the problem. Whining won't get it done, solve the problem. What are we going to do? Solve the problem. And that language can be a formula for young children with a feeling preference for addressing conflict. But it would not have been the first thing that occurred to them. When you have a young feeling child who's overwhelmed with the pain and misery of a problem in a relationship or a problem in an event, they first have to enjoy the misery of the moment, I say. They have to feel the pain of the moment, and then they can go forward with problem solving. But in the misery of that moment, they're not thinking most clearly. So having a formula to follow could be helpful. But if all we do is focus on solving the problem, the feeling child's needs won't be met, because they also need to be able to talk about how did that impact you? Not what were your emotional reactions, but how did that impact you? And when you felt unable to control the impact, how were you able to clear your thoughts so that you would be able to solve it? Because for many times it's accepting the inevitability of the moment and then getting on with it. And you don't have to be very young. It's a parent and child situation. And I don't know if I've told this story before, but one time when my son, it might have been college, might have even been, but it was around that age. And he was due to catch a flight out. And when we get to the airport, they basically just said, we canceled all those flights. And so the last flight is gone. He missed it. And it was like, well, if you had called and told us you had canceled all those flights, we could have gotten here earlier, but we didn't show up because we thought the plane was still leaving on this time. And I'm arguing with the agent, not very wisely, but I'm emotionally tense about the whole thing. And so I'm saying, why didn't you call us? You could have at least called and let us know. Now we have this major problem about how we're going to get to the location. And my son, who has a T preference, stepped up to in front and said, Mom, first we solve it, then we deal with everything else. And so he looked at her and he said, what do we need to do? And because he was calm and direct and straight, she was able to talk with him. And it was like, yes, that was the strategy that was needed in that moment. Mine was totally wrong. And I was already an adult. So now you make that me be 8 years old, and my friend didn't invite me to her birthday party, and I'm feeling really sad about it. All of a sudden, the intensity of that reaction is going to be 10 times more than it would have been as I experienced it as an adult. So that sensitivity to our failing kids and their needs seems to come more naturally to parents with an F preference, whereas parents with a T preference focus more on that problem-solving role and may not always think to go into the emotional end in terms of the impact with the decision-making. T kids are a joy to work with sometimes because they clearly focus, especially TJ, on the objectives they want to accomplish. And if tenderness is going to get the objective done, they use tenderness. If straightforwardness is going to get the objective done, they use straightforwardness. But that strategic approach to managing life events is evident in even young children with that preference. And that gentle approach of caring and support that we see in a lot of FPs is evident in that very young child. What they don't realize is that they're going to have to use both. And helping them develop that balance is where the parent's preference is going to make a difference. We tend to affirm what we see and what we value and what we respect. So we want to make sure that we understand about type differences ourselves. I'm anticipating that most of you who are currently working with families realize that, or that for most of your families that you're working with, likely the parent has had some exposure to type preferences before they asked you to give the instrument to their children. So because of that, and since it's a family system, you have that advantage in that the parent already has some knowledge of where their preferences are. But as we get wider in the use of type, some of our kids are going to discover these differences through school activities, and then you may begin to work with a family who doesn't have that. One nice thing about it is if 15 minutes isn't enough time for you and the family to be able to discuss everything that you'd like to discuss, then you can always schedule a second separate session of just time with the parent. And you can decide whether you want that to be cost included or whether you want to make that an additional service that you offer for them. So probably in the home, in the management of the home, it's going to be that judging and perceiving difference that is the more critical difference for families to have to cope with. Children with a judging preference value the predictability of that schedule from a very, very, very young age. And children with a perceiving preference come into this world without any sense of timing, without any sense of clock. Their love is to explore the world either actively or introspectively, but that lack of this is a 5-minute job, this is a 3-hour job, means that you're going to have a lot of times when they underestimate how long they need to do a particular task. Parents with that judging preference will sometimes read that behavior as inappropriate because it's not task efficient. So The parent's going to have to decide, is this the moment when I can guide them, or is this a moment I need to be directive? So if you don't have any time, if your time is very precious and you have to leave the house in 5 minutes to get there, then it's not a good moment to be guiding. Guiding can take longer. So that's when you're going to want to say, we have 5 minutes until we leave. In those 5 minutes, you need to do 1, 2, 3. Go now. It's just straightforward. So if there's danger, if the child is doing something that's potentially dangerous, well, of course we're not going to let them explore their options and see what else they could do. You're going to stop the danger in the moment. And then later, when you're talking with them independently, say, you looked like there was a car coming and you were dangerously close to the street there. I thought when the ball went out, you were going to run straight forward, and that's why I yelled stop. So what about you're playing basketball with a hoop there hanging over the street there? Is setting up the problem where the ball could go out when a car is coming? And what will you do to make sure that you're not at risk if the ball does go out into the rest of the street? In the moment, you don't want to do that. But later on, you do, because sometimes, especially with J children, pre-problem solving is one of the best strategies there is. So what would you do if? And then as long as they can think of alternatives now, when the moment might happen, they could think of alternatives later. So guiding is helping the child process different possibilities and then evaluating their action, their final selection for its reasonableness and its importance. So when there's an inappropriate behavior or a danger behavior, you, of course, are going to stop it first. But if we want them to have problem-solving options for the future, then we have to do more of the guiding. And so many times I don't even think parents are aware how directive they're being or how easily they're solving the problems for their child. I think I shared an example once where the child was on a little bicycle. It's like a two-wheeler with training wheels, so she might have been 4 or 5, looked like that anyway. And they were riding on the sidewalk. And the father was running in front and moving any trash cans that were in the way or any twigs that were in the way, or there's a little bump here, make sure you go up over the bump, and basically making it a perfectly fine road path for the child to ride their bike. To me, that would have been a great opportunity for guiding. So they could have stopped before they took their walk or their ride and looked down the block and said, do we see anything in the block that might interfere with being able to ride our bike safely and successfully? And if there is something like that trash can, what's our best solution? What could we do about that? And sometimes the child's going to look at you and say, we'll move it. Okay, so moving the trash can is a solution. Will you be doing that? Will you get off your bike to do that? Do you want me to do it? Are you asking for help with that? Or what were your thoughts on this? Because again, the more we solve the problem for the child, the less they have to think. Okay. I saw a parent recently. The child was a preschooler, probably about 4, and they were pouring their own cereal, or what were they getting? Was it cereal and milk? It was something like that. But the space between where the box was and where the bowl was and where the milk was and where the bowl was about an arm's length away. So the parent was like, no. Put the box right beside the bowl, move the milk on over, you have your spoon. Okay, pour the cereal first, then close up the box and put it over here because you're done with it. And then here's the milk. And so be careful now, take off the lid, then pour it, and then you put the lid back on, and then when you're all done, go ahead and put it over here. Well, yes, the child very clearly was able to pour their milk and pour their own cereal. But this, again, would have been one of those times. There's no danger. There's no rush. to say, I remember when I was little, I did that once, and I had such a long space between where my bowl was and where the milk in the cereal box was. I made a mess. And I thought, well, maybe next time I would do it differently. What do you think? You think it's far enough away, or you think you want to do anything about it, or what are your thoughts? And if the child says, it's fine, say, okay, I was just sharing you a time when it didn't work for me. But it's okay. If you want to see if it'll work for you this way, feel free to do that. But if you did want to do something differently, what else could you try? So you leave the final decision in the hands of the child, but you can guide them with your language to process the thought. Now, as the child ages, the more they're going to go, I got it, I got it. We figured this out. It's okay, I can do this. Sometimes when my kids were younger, my husband used to have such good lectures when they did something wrong. And they would roll their eyes and go, oh, geez, there he goes again. So we made a rule in the house that said, if you can figure out what the parent is trying to tell you and you can summarize it clearly, the parent will stop giving you the lecture. It is amazing how good my kids got at being able to say, Mom, Mom, Dad, Dad, what you mean to tell me is this. They would nail it. They would nail it every time. And we'd have to stop. And it would be so funny because my husband would come in and he'd look at me and he'd go, you know what else I was going to tell them? He'd give me the rest of the lecture. It was almost like I had such a good thing all prepared to help get them back on track. And said, but you did it already. They already know what you're doing. And when we guide children, I think we see some of that independent thinking a little bit better. But there always will be times when you just have to direct them, and you just have to tell them, no, that's not an option. You just have to do it this way. And why? That's just what I believe is best, and so we need to go forward, and that's what we're going to do. But as you would work with families, sometimes when you explain about type to them, they're looking at ideas to make the child do what the parent wants. And that is the purpose of type awareness. The purpose of type awareness is our slogan, which type awareness leads to better self-management. That self-awareness can make me manage myself better. But then we have to give them that opportunity to be able to do it. So when we're looking at other positive supports that parents can do, because even if all you have is that 15 minutes or so with them, you want to make sure you leave them with 1, 2, it'd be even great to have 3 specific things they can do so that when they work with their child after this session on type, they'll be able to improve the way the child problem solves or the way the child interacts with them. So some of the rules that have been helpful when I've been working with families has been the positive support that basically tells the child you must obey any rule until the rule is changed. So you can change the rule at a family meeting. I tell them that's how Congress works. That's how school systems work. If there's a rule that you don't like, that you think is outdated, such as haircuts or whatever, you can get the rule changed in the appropriate ways. But until the rule is changed, you obey the rule, which teaches them the respect for the social system that they're currently living in, as well as teaches them the tools for making changes in social systems as they age. Whenever possible, I encourage the family to, again, use that style of support that will match the child's type. So we know that the ESP is an action-oriented doing person, and so with that ESP, they're going to want to be doing something with you. A compliment is nice, but it would be so much nicer if you said, oh, I would so much love if you would come on over here and help me stir this. Then we could chit-chat while we're here and just kind of catch up on the weather and whatever else is happening in the day. The warmth for that F is that so many times the F will underestimate the security of a relationship. And you might say, they have no reason to doubt that I love them. But a child with an F preference who does not hear from the parent, I love you, will doubt it. And they'll say, but we do everything together. We're always together. We're always talking. We're always doing this stuff. But without that direct affirmation of, you know, I'm just so glad I got to be your mom. That's all you have to say. Or I'm so glad that as your dad, I get to do the basketball with you. I know your mom gets to do the other stuff, but I love that I get to be with you during basketball time. It's just so cool watching you play. That whenever there's a chance to give them affirmation, that what if we had timed that, might have been 5 to 7 seconds worth of time. But for the F, that's like filling their bucket with enough energy to continue for the next several hours. T, kids always need to know why. They just need to know why. They don't have to agree with you, but they need to know why. They need to know you're not just doing it for the sake of doing it. And that old saying about because I said so is probably about the because that's just so unreasonable. T adults and then sometimes T teenagers, not as much T elementary age, actually give themselves permission to not follow rules that they think are stupid. They don't even have to tell you that they think the rule is stupid. They just will, after it happens and they're caught, will go, well, it was a dumb rule anyway. I don't know why we have to follow that one. But it's truly an internal justification for them. So you can say, let me tell you why I think it's important for you to do this. You can disagree with me, but this is the reason behind my choice. For J's, if you just basically say things with the kids, you know, like, our plan for Saturday is this. Is that going to match your plan? And you may think that, why would I ask the child that? The plan for Saturday is whatever I'm going to plan. That's going to be it. But when you start getting into middle school age, high school age, many of those kids will have their own plan for Saturday. And when it does not match your plan, the two plans will actually cause a conflict in the family. So if there is something important, you need to have some kind of procedure that's going to allow the J plan of the family to be broadcast early enough so that the J plan of the young teen and the teenager can blend and around it. But as far as a compliment, I might say, wow, you finished that project so efficiently. You started with an idea, you got all your materials together, you completed everything, and you still have 30 minutes before bedtime. I am impressed with your planful ways. Now, you could say that to the ESFP, but I don't think they'd get as excited as the J would. Sometimes you're going to have students and children who want to tell you something, and again, we're getting into that middle school, adolescent, early adolescent age, when they're going to start to disagree with you. And that's actually a growth sign, because prior to that, most children think whatever their parents said, that was right. That was how everybody else in the whole world thought. So when all of a sudden they start saying, I don't think I agree with that, or other people don't think that way, you're actually seeing signs that they're integrating not only what they've learned from the family, but what they're learning from society, that kids and other adults in their life who support them. But when that happens, you can sometimes hear very challenging language, especially from T's, about, well, that's just a stupid idea. You don't even know what's going on anymore. I bet you don't even know what a millennial is. And you can get that kind of talk, and it's like, no. So you just say to them, you can share your idea, but you cannot share it rudely. So I will listen to your idea until you start to sound rude, and then we will stop this discussion. Politics aside, I wish we could do that in the adult debates that we're seeing right now. it seems that we ought to be able to express thoughts without being rude to one another. So, some of the things that we want to keep in mind is that everybody needs affirmation. But F children need it more often because T children self-evaluate. They know whether they've done a good job or not. But Fs are looking for feedback about whether my contribution had any importance. So you are amazing, or you being here made all the difference in the world is F language. They are comfortable with the vagueness of that. T kids want, why was I brilliant? Because the solution was brilliant. You know, your plan was amazing in that it allowed everyone to get what they needed done, and in a way that worked for each person. Brilliant. So T's are going to look for that specificity, and it's going to be more task-driven feedback versus the F looking more for person feedback. So if I were working with a family, I would tell this to the parents, but I would also tell this to the kids. And I would say, if you think your mom is one of those who has a T preference, how would you let her know she's doing a good job as a mom? How would you let her know that you appreciate everything that she's doing for you as a mom? And if you think your mom is an F, how would you approach your mom? How would you excellent at being able to verbalize what they think the parent wants to hear and what would be a positive for the parent? It just seems that lately we're getting so busy with so many things and commitments in life, especially during our school-age years, that we're missing these moments of affirmative communication. And we're much more in terms of directing language, and we're much more in terms of task completion language rather than just enjoyment with each other. So, my thought is that as you work with families, that you have clear in your mind what is an outcome I want the family to leave with. What is a skill or a strategy I want to give the child, and what is a skill and a strategy I want to give the parent? Because after an MTIC feedback session, both should leave feeling affirmed with who they are as a child and as a parent, and convinced and believe that they can make a difference. But I also always want them to know that it's a process. And as the children are growing, so is the parent growing. We aren't born with parenting skills, we develop them. And that part of that is becoming. You can't just be the parent, you become the parent, which means every time as your child ages, you're going to approach things in a different way because different needs are going to come up and you're going to be ready to respond. And along with that quote, I also have a favorite quote that I have that says, "To be all that we can be, we must dream of being more." Type gives us a tool for becoming more, just like that. So I'm open to questions, I'm open to comments, I'm open to good type stories that people have that they would like to share, or any experience they have working with families that they would like to share with us, their wisdom or their learning experience that they had from the feedback session.
Well, I just want to say thanks, Elizabeth. That was great. I learned a lot. I always learn a lot when you give these talks. So far, no one has asked a question, which is always astounding to me. But while they get up the nerve to do that, I have a question. If you're acting in the best intention that you possibly could with your child, no, I didn't quite do that one right, what's a good strategy to come back and try to correct that situation with, let's say, a T versus an F kid?
So a T parent with an F child?
Yeah, and vice versa too.
So everything is fixable, everything is fixable, but framing it so that the child can hear it best. So if I were a T parent and all I became concerned about was, did the outcome happen the way I thought it should? And it might be as something like, I've told you before, put the bowl close to the cereal. Now you're just going to make a mess if you keep leaving them far apart. I understand that the refrigerator is walking distance away, but carry the milk over to the bowl. It's a very directive tone, but it's also a tone that can sometimes send the message to the F child, don't think on your own, just do what I tell you and you'll be fine. So if later on I'm thinking, wow, did I miss a good opportunity there? I can go back and I can say to them, you know what? My energy was so low at that moment that I wasn't even able to think of choices that would really work well for me. And I'm sorry, I should have looked at your energy level to see if perhaps you would be able to handle it the way you were doing it, or you had the energy to explore options. So I wasn't your best coach in that moment. And all I can do is say, if that happens again and you think you're comfortable, what can we have as a magic signal between the two of us? And it can be a simple word such as Rumpelstiltskin or, anything you want. And when you say that word to me, I'll stop for a moment and think, and I'll give you the choice of whether you want to solve it on your own or whether you want my help in that moment. But again, that's during guiding time, not during any time when the behavior is inappropriate or when there's danger. But every parent who ever approaches a child with a fixable way for the next time, it will always work.
That's encouraging. Hey, Barb Skinner asks a question, Elizabeth. She says, what can you do when a parent disagrees with what the child believes they are? I'm going to unmute you, Barbara, if you want to comment too. Go ahead, Elizabeth.
Barb, did you want to add to that?
Well, I've had situations where the parents like, oh, that's just not true. That's not the way you act. That's not the way you behave. Mm-hmm. Oh, and then I always get concerned with how to validate the child.
Right. Now that's an excellent question. When that has happened, what I would anticipate is the child may be talking to you about my inner energy. Wow, that's how I'd really like to be able to do it. But I've already learned, and they can learn this by the age of 3 and 4, that that's not the way we do it in this house. Mm-hmm. So they actually spend a lot of time and energy learning the rules of the home. How do we do it here? So what we can say to the parent is, it's not the behaviors you notice, but maybe there's some piece of those definitions that sounded incredibly appealing to your child, that made them think that was really natural for them. But they may have felt that those weren't the ways that would work here. Mm-hmm. So what we can do is we can talk about ways that you could allow them both options and see where they go if they believe both options would be available. So it might be that it's an SN difference. And it's like, well, would you like to start with all the information and make sure we have all the information we need? Or should we start with kind of some possibilities, just throwing out ideas, and then decide if we want to use one of them or not? But for the parent to be able to start to say, where you see a disagreement, you may want to broaden and make sure that the opportunity to initiate either way is acceptable. A lot of times it happens more on the attitudes and the pointer than it does on the functions. Mm-hmm. Parents seem to get it on the functions, but they will go, oh, that child is not an extrovert, or that child is not an introvert. But you can be a shy extrovert, which means in social settings you still will have a shy approach to things, which is trait, but you get your energy by interacting and doing. That's a positive source of energy for you rather than a negative source. So to affirm the parent, you would say, that's not what you notice most about your child. And they may have already learned these are the rules to follow either at school or at home. But there was something about this definition of words that were so positive for them that they selected them. So let's see what we could do about maybe broadening those two options and see where the child goes. It could be just a developmental piece that, yes, that may not be who they truly are, but that's what they're exploring right now as part of their development. Or it might be that that's a piece of them that they would really like the opportunity to express.
Great. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
That's a good one. Hey, Elizabeth, Bill Starnes asks, how can parents use insights from type to overcome a child with a fixed as opposed to a growth mindset so their child can truly, quote, become? And I'm going to unmute you, Bill, in case you want to add more.
Yeah, Bill, tell me a little bit more about what you mean by a fixed.
Well, that's language from Carol Dweck's work, the idea of being a fixed mindset, that your talent is sort of fixed, and so you tend to shy away from challenges because it may just show that you're not as good as you think you are, or as good as you want people to believe you are, as opposed to a growth mindset where you look at challenges as an opportunity to develop your skills and grow. And so we have a case where because of being held back in school and so on and so forth, the child thinks, well, I'm really not as good as everybody was praising me as being, and so now it's really hard to encourage them and give them guidance without them feeling like you're attacking their fixed abilities. Right. So they tend to shy away from challenges, and so for example, they were invited to be on the mathlete team, but they didn't want to because they didn't want to be shown as lacking because they've been praised so much as being good at math, etc.
Right. So it sounds like there's two potential issues, and so I'm generalizing broadly, so I could totally be wrong, and if that's the case, you can correct me. But for the first piece about how do we do the encouragement, part of Jung's model says that the first half of life is discovering who you are and who you are not, so that instead of thinking I can be and do everything, and then when I can't, I'm a failure, you look at it almost as, of the 900 roads you could have gone down, you went down this one and you decided, no, I don't really, this isn't me. I tried it, it wasn't successful, and so therefore I'm not comfortable, I'm not going to do it. But for others, they'll go down that road and they'll go, I tried it, I wasn't successful, but I love this stuff, I'm going to keep doing it. So what do we have? Michael Jordan, who was not selected to be on the freshman basketball team at his high school because he wasn't good enough. Mm-hmm. So it's that discovery process, and in the discovery process, you can't discover your talents without also discovering your areas of lack of talent, that we cannot do everything, but that part of the exploration process is being prepared for the adventure of plus and being prepared for coping when it's a minus. But interest in the topic will give us a certain amount of perseverance in that topic. So a child who believes they'd really like to be a songwriter or even a writer, and maybe nobody really likes the writing that they're doing or the song that they've created, but they still want to do it, then that's telling you you have an interest in this area, but you haven't found an audience yet who appreciates your style. So you have a choice of looking for that audience or adjusting your songwriting or your writing to match the audience that's in front of you. If you had that path, which way would you rather? I'm sure there were some kids when they first started doing rap songs, my word, who's going to listen to this? And then rap became incredibly popular and powerful as a tool. So it's the discovery of who I am, which means maybe at this beginning part of your life, math was such a positive for you, it gave you a good foundation, but it may not be your final calling. And it is true, you might join the mathlete team and be a star, or you might be a supporting, what would it be, on a leg of a stool, where the whole team wins because each contributes equally. And there isn't a star there. So that may not be your area of excellence in life, but you may still be a very, very valued anchor for those other team members. But when I have a child who drops out at the first sign of failure, then I get concerned that we may be developing a pattern of failure avoidance, and they would rather say, I'm not interested, or I don't care, or that's dumb, than fail. And because of that, they quit initiating new, which means their resilience was low, and that's where they fell into that failure avoider kind of trap. So if that were the case, then it would almost be like saying, how much failure can I tolerate? Like, I don't mind getting one answer wrong, even 2 out of 10, but if I get more than 5 wrong, I can't do that. Okay, but let's pace that failure piece, because if you think you are going to be perfect every time, I already guarantee you, you're going to be disappointed in yourself. It's going to happen. So let's do a little bit about pacing. How much failure can we tolerate? Can I lose 1 swim meet, but not, but I still want to make the squad? Can I have 10 people say I did a great job playing, but 2 not like me? Is that going to be okay? Because young F kids in particular, if 10 people said you were wonderful and 2 said you were not, they would put more energy into listening to the 2 than they would the 10. So
hey,
then
Elizabeth?
it would be, yeah.
Hey, sorry to interrupt.
Time.
We have one more question. Do you think we can get one in there, Elizabeth?
Yes, I'm sorry. As long as you felt that I answered your question.
That was helpful. Thank you very much, Elizabeth.
Okay.
Okay, great. Sorry to cut that off, Bill, but I just wanted to give one more since we have just a little bit of time left. Karen, go ahead and ask your question rather than having me read it. Go for it. Karen Theron, you there? Is that you, Karen?
Yes.
Did you want to ask that question that you typed for me? Why don't you ask it yourself?
Oh, sure. Elizabeth, hi, I'm Karen. I'm from Canada. I'm working with a family with 2 INTJ parents, and I'm just coming back from their briefing with them. Big blind spot that they self-identified and said, sometimes with their kids, they have an ISFJ, a 12-year-old boy, and an ENFJ, 9-year-old girl. So just their own comments and feedback to me, whether it's arguments in the household or they're both professionals and just coming home, it translates into almost an unintentional diminishing of the children. So they're looking for some practical strategies on how to avoid that and learning from one another.
So part of that may be helping to develop the parents' understanding of what does, I believe you said, an SF child and an NF child.
That's right.
What will they need to hear? Because truly, many T parents don't even have a clue that they have insulted their child.
Exactly. And I'm an INTJ myself, so it's interesting.
Yeah, they say, I don't even know if my mom or dad love me. And the parent would be like, what are you talking about? How could that thought even have gotten into your head? Well, it's because they didn't get any feedback. And no feedback to an F child is the same thing as a criticism. So they do need to hear daily. It's just a joy to come home some nights, because I know you're going to be here and we're going to have a good moment and a bad moment, but we got more good than bad, and so I'm always looking forward to it. So you don't pretend it's perfect, but the parent who has a T preference and does not know type or hasn't been exposed to it very much is not likely to have that language at their disposal until you tell them strategically. It's going to help your child more if you can be more affirmative. Again, we're talking 5 and 10-second comments here. Just give them a positive affirmation once or twice a night, and you're going to see amazing differences. Because when a child with an F preference is comfortable that the relationship is solid, they can accept correction. But when it is not solid in the child's mind, then every bit of correction will feel like a threat to the relationship. And when they don't feel like they can keep the relationship alive, then there's no point in trying it anymore. And unfortunately, with timing, they wear out usually by adolescence, and that's when sometimes those divisions happen, just as a synchronicity of not enough affirmation earlier and fatigue from constantly trying to get it. So it may be that you would offer those parents and say, would you be interested in having a half-hour follow-up session where we talk about 2 strategies you might try for the next month, the next few weeks, and we do some feedback about whether that worked for your family or not.
That's wonderful. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Okay,
Hey,
Rob,
Elizabeth.
well, I guess that is.
Let me just ask you one quick one. I think you might have a short answer from Katie Brandt. She says, with a feedback session with a family and a teenager is holding back because of a tension between the teen and the parent, is it appropriate to ask to do the teenager's feedback session without the parent?
It'd be appropriate to ask the teenager, would you like your feedback session independent, or would you like your family to be able to be here? If they say, I'd rather do it independent, because of their age, then you would still say to them, absolutely, we can do your verification piece independently, but you do know then if your parent wants to know your type, they have the right to know that information. But you have the right to be sitting here with me when I share it with them, so you can hear everything I say to them.
Good. That's a good thing to know.
You can do it independently first.
Great.
You're going to find that a lot of times if there's tension because of some other things that are happening, because like I said, not everything between parents and child is related to type. But also I think it's sometimes if it's a step-parent and that step-parent hasn't yet had a full bonding with the child, maybe it's a new merging of families. You can run into that.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, I think we've come to about an hour, and that was a great session. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. I just want to remind everyone that one of the things Elizabeth mentioned early in the session was using the exercise, I am a good student, and you'll find that in each of the workbooks that are available, and we always strongly encourage you to make sure every child gets a workbook. It comes in elementary, middle, or high school level, and that really helps solidify the feedback session. And also want to remind everyone that you can stay in touch with us via our Facebook page, our Twitter account, our YouTube channel, our newsletter. You can go to the typeforkids.org website if you want to share this information with anyone who wants to get started working with kids and working with the MMTIC feedback indicator. And Elizabeth, thank you so much. We really appreciate what you do.
Thank you, Rob. Thanks for organizing it all, and thank you all for sharing some time tonight. I hope you are having a pleasant evening and you enjoy the sunlight that's left wherever you are.
Thanks, everybody. Feel free to contact me if you need anything. It's easy, rob@capt.org. And we're going to sign off. Thanks again, Elizabeth. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.